Did you know that the first time that Weekly Shonen Jump didn't have a sports manga running in the pages of the magazine in its entire history was with the release of this issue on August 17th of 2020, with the issue prior having released the final chapter of IQ. That means that for over 50 years, Shonen Jump always had at least one, but very often two or even three, sports series running at any single point in its run. Sports manga is a staple of the medium and a staple of shonen, Jump themselves having a lot of baseball series very early on. And while the genre hasn't really faded out with titles like Blue Lock and Haoashi, as well as long runners like Hajime no Ippo and Baki, when it comes to Shonen Jump, it's not hard to notice the struggle to have a proper sports series last in the magazine. The last successful sports manga was Inomaru Zumo in June of 2014. That means that for the past 8 years, Jump has failed to properly establish a follow-up to IQ. And it's not necessarily because of a lack of trying. Since the release of Inomaru, I count a total of 15 series that were released in Jump and could be considered sports manga. Out of those 15 though, there aren't many that are noteworthy, with all of them being cancelled pretty early on, with the exception of Straighten Up, which lasted for a total of 10 volumes and almost 2 years. People have gone as far as calling it the Spokon Curse, saying that any recent sports title is just doomed to fail. Now, I personally just think we haven't had a sports manga the same quality as IQ in the past 10 years, and when we do, that manga will flourish. But while we wait, it's not like Jump is completely out of sports manga in their current roster. So today I'm going to look at the roster and show you the new faces of sports manga, why they aren't the manga that the pure sports manga fans are waiting for, and why the manga that they are looking for is already here, but they are hidden in plain sight. Let's start with the obvious elephant in the room. Shonen Jump already has a successful sports manga. As a matter of fact, it's one of the breakout titles of last year. I'm talking, of course, of Blue Box. This manga seems to finally be the manga we're waiting for, the savior of the sports genre, and at last a proper follow-up to IQ. The popularity and sales of the manga reflect it, but the real problem is apparent once you start reading the manga. Now, I need to leave the disclaimer that I love Blue Box. It's one of my personal favorite manga in the roster right now, and it's an amazing rom-com series. But that's the thing. Blue Box is not really as sports related as the marketing may reflect. Sure, every single main character practices a sport, and the sport is very important for the character, their story and team, but at the end of the day, the sports elements are just there to support the main genres of the manga, which are romance and comedy. And that is reflected in how much the sports are presented in the story. More often than not, we are spending the time in the prep time of these matches, reflecting how the sport, the match, and the rivals are important to the main character, and how the other characters deal with that, which are all very important elements in sports manga, but the key difference is in the time we spend in these actual matches. There's no big match in this series so far, and I think there never will be. Whenever we start spending too much in a single one, the manga ends up just skipping to the end. The important thing in Blue Box is not the thrill of the sport, but rather what the wins and losses do to its main characters. And with that in mind, it's easy to see why sports manga fans may be disappointed when introduced to Blue Box. Now, I do think that has a lot to do with how the manga is marketed as well. It should not be considered sports and rom-com manga, but rather a rom-com manga with sports elements as flavor. And I say this because contrary to Blue Box, which got a decent amount of criticism for how little sports it has, there is another manga in Shonen Jump right now that is about as much sports manga as Blue Box, but because people are not expecting it, it got a lot of praise for how it implemented those sport elements. I'm talking of High School Family. Now, for those that read the manga when it came out, or heard about it, never cared too much, and dropped it early on, or not read it at all, me calling it sports manga may confuse you quite a bit. After all, for the early phases of this manga, High School Family was nothing but a gag manga about a bunch of people that normally wouldn't be in high school, being in high school. And while that is still very much the core of the manga, the series had to grow and evolve past that, and the way that it did was by implementing various sports into it, and more recently, even delinquent manga chapters. The way that it goes about it is that each element of the family joins a different sports club, and the manga does a really good job at showcasing these sports, with full arcs, albeit small ones, being completely dedicated to nothing but a sport at a time. It showcases baseball, tennis, shogi, and volleyball, all of them quite famous sports within manga already, and I think its narrative towards especially shogi and volleyball can at points rival actual sports manga. With the shogi 8-year-old genius learning how to enjoy this game that she absolutely mastered in a couple of tries, despite the fact that she much rather be doing more girly things with the other girls in her school, as well as dealing with the fact that she is completely destroying the spirits of the players without really meaning to. And of course, we also have the dad's entire story of going back to volleyball after having left in middle school 30 years earlier and finding just how much he still loves it, while at the same time discovering the true limits of his now older body. Both of these are stories that could easily be full-fledged emotional sports manga by themselves, but the biggest problem with High School Family as a sports manga is that it's not a full-fledged manga about those topics. For every sports arc, there's tons and tons of gag chapters and other plot points because that's still what the manga is about. It's a gag manga. And even when it's focusing on sports, it focuses on too many. Very rarely do we get proper matches. I still think that when it's time for it, it really shines, but for fans of sports manga, it doesn't really work, because about 60 to 70% of the time, it's not being that. So while there are two sports manga in the magazine right now, I wouldn't consider them in the same vein as something like iShield 21 or IQ or Slam Dunk. Those manga are sports first and foremost, and I love them because of what that normally implies. These are all series which shine when it comes to rivalries and stories of struggling to succeed, of climbing the ladder, of meeting people who are in the exact same journey as you are. People who can be your closest friend and your worst enemy all at once, with matches that show how much both sides need to win and the problem that comes with only one winner. That's why I love tournament arcs and competitions, and none of them do it as well as sports manga. When I think of matches like Joe vs Rikishi in Ashida no Joe, or Shohoku vs Sano in Slam Dunk, or Karasuno vs Nekoma in IQ, I think of fights with levels of nuance that easily surpass a lot of battle shonen ones. Because in sports manga there is no evil force trying to destroy the world or the main characters. A lot of the time, the face on the other side is just a mirrored version of the main character. One that has the same goals, the same drive, and the same passion, and that leads them to the same path. Now having to prove to one another which wants it more, needs it more, and has the skill and drive to do it. In a lot of cases, both sides really deserve to continue, but the true nature of the sport means that only one can win and only one can be the best. And with those elements in mind, I believe there are actually two manga in the magazine right now that are essentially sports manga that fill the same niche and scratch the same spot as the traditional sports manga, but because they're technically about sports, they get more tagged into slice of life or non-battle battle shonen in these categories. I'm talking of both PvP and Akane-Banashi. Both of these fit in the same style of manga like Bakuman, Act-Age, or the newer Showa Shoden, as series that are not necessarily about a sport, but more so about someone following a hobby or a career of some sort. I imagine Food Wars to be the same, but since I haven't actually read it, I can't really confirm it. Some people may call this non-battle battle manga, a term that was actually coined in Bakuman to describe manga like Death Note. Manga that follow a lot of battle manga tropes and structures, like fights or face-offs of some sort, but aren't actually about full-fledged battles. Death Note and Promised Neverland are good examples, being mostly about trying to overcome and surpass the enemy without actually involving fist fights. The thing is, all sports manga can be considered non-battle battle manga in this sense. They mainly focus on the sides fighting each other, competing to see which is best. What they differ is, again, more so in their more grounded nature, even if some of them are definitely over the top, as well as antagonists being more leaning to rivals than villains. That isn't to say that there aren't going to be villains in sports manga and there aren't going to be rivals in battle ones, but the skills are kind of reversed. Most of the opposing characters are not going to be pure evil. Instead, they're going to be partners. People will understand you better than anyone else, but that will still be on the opposite side of a challenge. And of course, with the nature of sports, the characters are not necessarily going to climb the scale by facing stronger and stronger opponents, but instead in different size competitions and tournaments, which will actually see the previous opponents return time and time again, as losing doesn't necessarily mean the end, but instead just a natural hurdle that everyone needs to face at a certain point. That also helps the fact that some of the time our characters can afford to lose. Even if there are high stakes, most of the time the loss doesn't necessarily mean the end of the manga. Weirdly enough, that amps the stakes in ways that some battle shonen just can't. Luffy isn't going to lose against Kaido. At the end of the day, there's too much at stake for him to viably lose in the narrative. But Hinata losing in the final of a tournament with a big strong team, sure, that can happen. And that helps the uncertainty of the ending to make everything far more thrilling and exciting. And when we look at those things that sports manga can and often do, and when we compare them to Akane-Banashi and Peak 6, we start to see how these manga fit within the essence of the genre. Akane-Banashi seeing Akane right now competing in the student tournament of Rakugo and introducing a bunch of characters that will likely rise to higher and higher competitions as time goes forward. And P6 being in the middle of a full-on team match to see which of the group of 3 can play the piano the best. These are non-sports sports manga. And if you're someone looking for something like IQ, Ashira no Joe, or Slam Dunk, and you haven't found it in Blue Box, I challenge you to check out these two to see if they fit your needs a bit better. With that said, I don't want misunderstandings. The point of this video is to point out how close these two series are to the formula compared to the others, and how people like me who enjoy the formula a lot can find similar stories outside of the quote-unquote sports genre. What I'm not saying in this video is that this is the only correct way to do sports manga. Every manga should be able to approach the genres and topics as they wish and as they feel like it's important for them. I'm also not saying that sports manga are better than battle shonens. If you follow this channel, you'll know how much I love battle shonen. I'm just saying that for how similar they are, there are key things that are more common in one genre than are in the other. And I am also not saying that Blue Box or High School Family should be more like Akane-Banashi or P6. Again, they are simply different. I enjoy all of these series and I recommend you checking all of them. Despite looking like Shonen Jump is currently going through a bad spot in terms of sports, it's good to know that there are choices and that genre isn't really dead. It just has a different face. But if you want to know more of my thoughts on the current state of Shonen Jump, you can check out this video of me reacting to Super Eyepatch Wolf's video on the same topic, that is the one on the left. And if you watched it till here, thank you very much, and I'll see you next video.